So yeah, the AI era of Google search. Is SEO finally dead? I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler. We're going to talk about it right away. You'll know real soon. So hi, for everybody who don't know, my name is Greg Brooks. I'm a partner and CMO at SearchTides. I personally have been in SEO for about 11 years. In terms of SearchTides, it's a 60+ person SEO agency, generated over $100 million in SEO revenue for our clients. This year, 2023, 72% of our clients actually increased their budget with us. And over 2/3 of the people who work with us, so the persons of contacts on our accounts with our clients, get promoted within 2 years of working with us. So just a little bit of background information about us. One of the things that SearchTides is most well known for is basically being part of groups that crawl and scrape massive amounts of pages on the internet and being able to divide and create ranking factors in Google. So those are the traits and characteristics that actually determine what makes stuff appear high in the search results and what doesn't. And we're going to get into all that sort of good stuff today. I'm pumped to kick it off. I think the first thing to say is like, SEO is dead. Yes, no, maybe so. Actually, this time around, there's quite a lot of people, Taylor, who I think are actually thinking that this might be the end for search and for SEO inside, which is fun because SEO has this like dramatic ability to die, and yet continues to be able to die over and over again. It did so in 2004 with local search. It did so during a trio of updates, Panda, Penguin, and Hummingbird. There were position 0 snippets and knowledge graphs that popped up that made everybody say, oh, wow, what possibly could undo this? People also took a lot of organic search results. ChatGPT, do you remember, Taylor, when ChatGPT killed SEO in October of 2020, whatever, like 2022? And the latest and greatest is SGE, it's Search Generative Experience. So SEO is like many other things where the idea is that, oh, it's here today, gone tomorrow. That has been the theme essentially since search came out and since SEO came out. And what's actually happening is the same thing that's always been happening, which is Google is decreasing the amount of websites that it wants to trust. And that is a feature of its search engine algorithm. And another feature is that Google is trying to keep people on google.com instead of going to websites. And we saw this with Google My Business. We saw this with position 0, rich snippets. We see this with the knowledge graph. We saw this with people also ask. And now we're seeing the very same thing with SGE. It's always been people trying to be kept on google.com by Google. If you understand that, though, there's implications to this and there's strategy that you can take out of it. So the number one thing is that search results pages will continue to become more top heavy, meaning that things will become more and more winner take all. And the reason why that's the case is because the search result page gets more congested with features and components of it. So those who are even on page 1, maybe position 7, 6, 8 in that range, they're going to over time see their clicks decrease. But if we're being honest with each other, this has been something that's been happening for a while. And this even with mobile, like on mobile, if you go, there's big boxes of carousels there, and there's lots of, someone could have a Twitter post that's very long in its entire screen. So SEO, whether people want to admit it or not, has always been about being unilaterally victorious and winning in those super top challenging spots and getting all of the spoils that comes with winning in a winner take all game, essentially. So in terms of where it all started this time, this has been with the most recent helpfulness content updates that have taken place. And there's really been 3 of them in particular. There's 2 on here. You could argue that there's one that was in like July of last year. There's obviously, for the first time ever, another core update that took place in November of this year. But essentially what this means, and you don't need to read this text to understand it, Google is really pushing forward this idea of having helpful content and being a helpful beacon of information, and more important than information, of experience and of expertise on the internet. So we're going to go through a couple different statements and thoughts that come directly from Google themselves, and then we're just going to talk about what the implications of those are. And if anybody has any questions along the way, feel free to ask. Like this my nightmare scenario is that I get up here and monologue for an hour. But my other scenario, which I'm quickly realizing, is that I don't know if I can see questions coming in. I don't know, Taylor, if you can see questions coming in.
I can see them coming in. If you actually want to click on the chat, I think it's disabled.
Okay.
If you want to open that up. But folks, if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A as well, or throw it in the chat. Either way, I'm monitoring them. Or we'll try to insert them throughout the event. If not, we'll get them at the end as well.
Cool. And I see some folks raising their hands, like, just ask away. You know, this is just fire away. So the most important, in our opinion, component of helpfulness is that it is a site-wide signal. There is pretty much only one other thing in SEO that's a site-wide signal, and it's your website authority. It's basically your link profile. For the first time ever, pages that you do not care about, their helpfulness will dictate your rankings on pages that you do care about. And this is pretty fascinating, but what it means is you can't just leave a scorched earth and things that you've done in the past and things that are considered low priority. Your entire body of work is what actually matters here most. So that's kind of one big thing that we see. The next thing is that this process of content helpfulness is actually being graded and evaluated by an algorithm. So it's not done by a human, which means that not only are humans not part of the process, but there's patterns, there's inefficiencies, there's things that get over-indexed, there's things that get overlooked, and those are all things that we're going to talk about here. The next big piece of information is that this is an algorithm that's constantly running. That means that if you had a content helpfulness penalty, not necessarily penalty, if other people had more helpful content and then therefore their search results increased and yours thus decreased, you can fix that and get a live update, most likely, asterisk. Not 100% certain, but this is how it's been with all the previous algorithm updates that are running live like this. Now, the flip side of that is, if you have a lot of content on your website that you kind of know isn't really doing too much, is not being helpful, and you've quote unquote made it so far, that doesn't mean that you're home free. It just means that you have vulnerable parts of your website that you probably need to fix right away because bad times are coming ahead. And you don't want to be the one saying internally, I told you so, because it's never a good thing to be in a position of reactiveness. You have to be proactive now when you have the opportunity to. And then some other things in here. There's a lot of content on the left side of the page. Don't worry about reading any of it. Just the questions on the right. Are you making content that's actually made to rank? Are you generating your content through research? Because by the way, like, so does an AI. You now having a well-researched piece of content is not going to be that valuable. Instead, can you bring experiences? Can you bring expertise that doesn't exist on the internet? So think about the type of expertise you have to be able to talk about stuff that's not out there. Think about what I do in my day-to-day or week-to-week or month-to-month. We can talk about what we do with clients, and that is a level of experience that doesn't exist in the theoretical world of the internet, and stuff like that will be considered helpful. And then the last sort of thing is the top 10, if you have a website that is essentially kind of about certain content, and you have the ability to bring in traffic from other content, should you actually be focused on that? Well, previously the answer was you could, and now the answer is that's going to harm your website because that's not going to be helpful to your audience. And the mark over on the side, do you have an existing or intended audience for your business or site that would find your content useful if they came directly to you? That's sort of the big piece there. So we do have one question I'll pause to answer. Do you have a view on how to prioritize optimizing pages that suddenly matter now, especially if you have a massive website full of low traffic pages? So there's three things you're going to want to do. Number one is you're probably going to want to take a lot of those low traffic pages and redirect them, because, and as we'll get in the future, we'll get into it in a little bit, those are probably the pages that are going to be most cannibalized by all of the AI content that's going to be created in the next 18 months. Number two is your winners still matter more. And so you should still put a lot of your focus on the things that are performing best. And then number three is follow a system on how to kind of revise existing content on those lower value or medium value pages that you want to keep around. And we'll talk about later how to instill expertise and experience into those actual pieces of content. But it's a good question. Okay. This is a statement that I don't worry too much about. I just focus more on the other side of it, which is expertise without SEO, without expertise, without experience, without adding in your own legitimate, authentic, unique value to humans who are on your website. That part of SEO is dead. That is the part of SEO that's going to get consumed by AI content, which is going to be created with a push of a button. A big thesis that we have at SearchTides is that the cost to create content is going to go to zero. GPT 7.0 or 8.0, whatever, will come around and it'll be a button that you can press and it'll get a pretty good piece of content. So what can you as a human being do that an algorithm cannot, that an AI cannot? And the answer is right from the heart. Like that's ultimately like right from a position of actually knowing and understanding things. Okay. So let's break it down anyways, because at the end of the day, it's still SEO and we need to know exactly what it means and the exact stuff we can take advantage of and better understand. So Google, if you were to ask them, they'd probably tell you that they're great at crawling the internet and also that they're using this new way of AI to determine helpfulness. And that's totally something that's like really well along currently. The reality is there's up to 50 billion pages that Google needs to crawl. And if they're using an AI algorithm to do so, and machine learning if they're using machine learning to do so, which we already went over a quote that says they are, it's going to actually cost them a bunch of money to do that. And I know that fractions of a fraction of a penny don't seemingly add up, but let's actually do some math on it. So Google has an engine called PaLM 2, and the cost per that, these engines essentially, like if you've ever tried to type something super long into ChatGPT and it comes back and says like, that's too long, I don't really understand, what you want from me there. And then if you've also tried to get ChatGPT to write you a book, it won't do it either. And the reason why that's the case is because there's limits to basically the amount of synthesis in a single run that these tools can do and that these algorithms can do. So for PaLM 2, there's a limit of around 6,100 words on the page, and it's super expensive. If you remember, one of the big things that came out when ChatGPT became popular was this idea that it was really costly, that it cost around 43 cents for OpenAI to have a response to your prompt, whereas it cost Google about 2 cents to load a search results page. And so the economics were pretty far away in that. Now you take Google now needing to crawl the entire internet using AI, because that's what they're using to grade helpfulness. How are they going to do that and reduce their costs? They're probably going to use one of their versions of PaLM, which is called PaLM 2 Gecko, and that can ingest 2,000 external words. So our thesis at SearchTides right now is that helpfulness of whatever page you're on is absolutely and only determined within the first 2,000 words of the page, which means if you have articles out there and you have authorship bios at the bottom of the page, they're probably not going to get picked up. And it's going to be really hard to compete against people who do. So that's one real important concept. The next thing that I think makes sense to touch on and talk about is this idea of a helpfulness score, because it goes hand in hand with the foundational components of SEO. So foundational SEO is all the things that you know about. It's the link profile of a website. It's the content existing in general. It's the technical SEO. It's the on-site optimization. And helpfulness content is basically a score. You can think of it as a score that gets added to or on top of your foundational content, your foundational score. And now you have your new broad score. So keep an eye out. SearchTides will be showing you triangles and pyramids that have the same thing, but for today we're going with color coded. Here's some examples. Let's say you have a website that has a 50 on a foundational score. That's all of the SEO traits and characteristics that we know today, and it's considered mostly helpful. So PaLM 2 is going to crawl all these different pages of the website, and it's going to say a lot of this stuff we consider it helpful and some of the stuff we don't. So it's going to get a 0.8 multiplier score. Now the total new score for this website will be a 40. Let's take website 2. It's starting off as a 42 foundational score, but it's all considered helpful. It's ending with a stronger score than a website that was fundamentally stronger than it. So you can kind of see where this is going. The third piece is you can have a website that is if you're an SEO, think about domain authority, think about domain rating, think about these sorts of things. That's really not helpful. And all of a sudden, that website is catapulted down to the depths of the search results. And you have other websites which are foundationally weaker actually generating better results just because their content is considered more helpful and their website's considered more helpful. So there's 3 common questions here, which is like, okay, well, why can my homepage lose rankings? Because it's not an article. Competitor's website sucks. Why is it ranking better than mine? And I have a lot of good content, but it still didn't, it didn't go down, or my rankings didn't improve. So number 1, remember, it's a site-wide signal. It doesn't matter if your page is an article or not. That site-wide score is impacting every single page of your website. And that's also number 2 here. This is a, good content. What you think is good content is not necessarily the same as what this AI from Google is knowing good content. And so it's not about what we think, it's about what actually happens. And that's why the best way to actually look at this is to get into specific examples and to look for anomalies. Why does seemingly bad content perform well? And why does seemingly good content perform poorly? You're going to be an SEO expert by the end of this, Taylor.
Yes.
So we gathered a couple examples from some stuff out there, and we put together some examples of us as well. This is, we're just going to go through a wide range of things here. This is Best Cigar Lighters. This is a website. This is a web page that's pretty poor in terms of its authorship. It's pretty poor in terms of its helpfulness, but yeah, it went up on the latest update. So how could that be possible? Well, this website, Famous Cigar Land or whatever it's called, actually sells these lighters. So it's not making a recommendation about something else. It's talking about a product that it's actually selling. And so a page like this is most likely what's happening here is it's not going through the process of being graded for helpfulness. Whereas if you had a review site and you made this exact same page, you would probably get killed for it. So there's a difference being kind of the owner of the products versus being someone who's supposed to be an expert telling you what is good and what's not good. And that's sort of a big thing here. This next example is how to clean a stone fireplace. Critical information for everybody who's got stone fireplaces and or just loves stone fireplaces and just wants to see the world be clean. This is a pretty bare bones page, but yeah, it went up in the latest algorithm update. Why is that? It's all because of user generated content on this page. So a lot of you probably know that Reddit did really well in the last couple of algorithm updates. Why is that? Because what is someone talking on the internet? It's them talking about their experiences. And that doesn't even exist in the realm of expertise. But things like this show us that if you are talking about your own experiences, those are going to be valuable and those are going to be rewarded in search results, because that is something that an AI cannot do. So here's another example, how to build a low deck. This is for everybody who loves decks, or wood, or any type of spa or hot tub that you might want to, or is just really sick and tired of high decks and is like, that's 2023 me, and I'm just moving into the next era over here. This is a good article. This is like objectively a good article, and this article tanked in the latest algorithm update. Why is that? Well, if you look at just the raw information on it, I think my favorite part about this article is that directly in the article, the guy kind of says tongue in cheek, like, I'm not an expert, I'm just talking about what worked for me. Probably the worst thing that you could say in an article right now is that you're not an expert, when Google is specifically looking for expertise and it doesn't understand context. So it's just got this AI algorithm running around and being like, all right, this page is not about an expert because it says it's not about an expert, so I'm out of here. And it's something that fickle. And that's why when we talk about, like, this is not being analyzed by a human, you have to understand it's a light switch. It's not one of the fancy like dimmers yet. It's just, is it helpful? Is it not? Does it have expertise? Does it not? Is there experience? Is there not? And there are very hard lines drawn in between the two of them. So this is a fun one. Fisher Institute This like seems like it could be legitimate. It's got some nebulous dude called Leo Green. Not really sure what that person's deal is, but they also have someone called Dr. Sophia Harrison. So a couple things here. Number one, I don't know if these people exist outside of this website. There's no social footprint for them on the internet. Google probably has the ability to do that, to make that conclusion as well. Number two, I want you to take a look. Fisher Institute, they're basically like, hey, we're here for your healthy living lifestyle. And they have an entire section on their website called fruits names. And if you go into it, it's like, here's a list of fruits that start with the letter N. Here's a list of fruits that start with the letter P. And it's a perfect example of, just because you can generate traffic for something doesn't mean that it's actually, if I show up on this website, am I like, hell yeah, I was looking, I would benefit greatly from knowing all of the fruits that start with the letter B? Of course not. I'm there for my health. And so that's kind of like the disingenuous stuff that's going on, right? And from the past that we're bringing forward, and we're saying like, Google's like, this doesn't help anybody. No one would be excited to learn that cherry is spelled with the letter C. So like we see what you're doing. And because it's a site-wide signal, we will penalize you for this. We will put other people who don't have that same issue higher than you. But I like this one instead. How to get a doctor's note. Bare bones article by some nebulous thing called Aries Medical Center. They spelled center wrong. I'm just kidding. I know where it's from. But, shot up in the search results. Why? Because it's actually a medical center. Who do you think would know better on how to get a doctor's notes than an actual medical center and who writes doctor's notes? Like, the answer is no one. And if you are looking at this right now and you're hearing this and you're thinking, I don't have a way to compete with that. How could I compete with that? That's our point. You shouldn't be competing in this area. Like, you don't have the expertise. You don't have the experience. Maybe you do. Maybe you're just like, you had an article, you're like, I've gotten 750 doctor's notes in my life. I love collecting those pieces of paper. Here's how I do it. You would have like fantastic experience doing that, and you'd be right at the top of the search results. But if you're not bringing that sort of thing to the table, or you're not a direct expert, you will lose to websites that are, and to people who do those things. So this is a website that got tanked for how to get a doctor's note. The flip side of that is they have someone who's writing pretty much all of their articles. Her name's Jessica. She seems like a very nice person. And she has, according to this website, a master's of engineering in biomedical engineering. Here's the trick. That is like medically adjacent sometimes, and other times it's not relevant. And if you're just grouping someone into this whole category and you're like, write about everything inside of the medical industry on this website, there's not going to be expertise that carries through there. You're actually going to shoot yourself in the foot, because you're going to call out that you are definitively not an expert in this topic. And that's a problem. And the other thing that's a problem here, which we'll get into later, is like, expertise and experience does not care about what books you like to read in your spare time, or that you really enjoy time in nature, or that you've traveled to 26 countries. Expertise cares about what credibility do you have to be writing about this. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's pretty much what we're going to say about it. Last thing I want to cruise through. How long have we been going for, Taylor, by the way? I want to make sure that
We're good. We've been going for about 25 minutes.
Cool. The last example here, which is a fun one. Here's a website, Healthline. They got tanked on this. Well, not tanked, but like lost like 30% traffic probably. How to build bigger arms. And what's the problem with this page? It's the same shit that's on every other article talking about how to build arms. They're like, guess how I built my arms? I did curls. I did triangle push-ups. Maybe that was a problem. That doesn't work. But we were doing dips, overhead stuff, whatever it is. You could take out headline, you could take out Healthline, you could take out the author, you could paste this article on any website, you could paste this article behind any authorship profile, and it would be the same. So there is no actual experience there. Compare that to this website, Bony to Beastly. In the very first sentence, they say, I've managed to bring my arms from 10 inches up to 16 inches. That is experience. Like, that is the definition of experience. Like, do you want to get bigger arms? I did. I'm going to tell you how I did it. Maybe that works for you. Now, that doesn't mean that the author on the prior article didn't do the exact same thing. Maybe they went from, 10-inch arms to 25-inch straight pythons. But the point is, they didn't say that. The age of expertise and the age of experience is not the age of humility. It's the age to be explicit, to put your stuff out there and to brag about, or at least to vocalize, or at least to write about the legitimate expertise and experience that you actually have as an author in this area. So a question came in: if you have the experience on a topic and can use stories to share that experience, but are weak on tangible SEO signals compared to, say, an e-com website, what are the fastest ways to start building those authority signals? Typically, if you have good expertise and you just don't have the foundational SEO stuff, that's pretty much going to be, your website's not as authoritative. You probably need a bunch of good links. Your link profile is probably not as up to date. You could have technical issues on your website that could prevent you from getting crawled properly. You might not have a good interlinking profile, but typically in that instance, if you're covered on the content side of things, if you're covered on the expertise and authoritativeness side of things, you're probably not covered on the link building and the link profile side of things. So there's always this back and forth component of SEO that gets added together. And it's really all about making sure that we can kind of take on both of those things. Okay, cool. Measurable factors. So this is really where SearchTides does some pretty cool stuff. And we saw some really wild things happen in the last algorithm update. This is a big confusing worksheet. What it simply means, and this is what we talked about before, when you crawl lots of different web pages, you can catalog a website by characteristics and traits. If you crawl the top 100 for a given search results, and then you crawl different search results millions and millions of times, you get a broad understanding of what specifically starts to create positive rankings in Google and other search engines. That is what you are looking at here broadly. Inside of it, and again, don't worry about looking at all this stuff because it just, I don't know, it just looks like a sad pre-Christmas vibe thing going on here. But the point is that inside of this is, okay, you can look at all the stuff that says down. And then in the column in the middle, if you look at it, it's pretty much all next to this thing called relevancy. So relevancy is typically what on-site optimization optimizes for. It's stuff like your keywords. It's stuff like your matchwords, which is the bold and description on on a search result. It's stuff like your LSIs. It's language that is repeated throughout the top 100 search results. That is not standard language like to, above, from, below. And it is entities. So it's officially recognized subtopics of a broader topic. Down, 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 down next to those means that they are mattering less than they used to before the algorithm update. So let me translate that. Your on-site optimization is less effective than it used to be. You cannot just tune and tweak and change stuff like keyword densities and frequencies and instances of this and that and get the same results that you used to, because the helpfulness of what you're writing, the experience, the expertise of what you're writing has a much higher weight. And that is the more important thing. This was actually probably the biggest algorithm update ever, where we saw the most amount of factors that used to correlate, meaning they used to contribute to rankings, no longer contribute to rankings. So what does that mean? Our thesis is that Google's they're basically gutting their search engine algorithm, and they're making room for AI to dictate more of the search results and more stuff like helpfulness and things like that, it goes back to what we're saying at the beginning, which is like right from the heart, but also be authentic in how we think about being a website, being a company, and being a shepherd of someone who winds up on your website and bringing someone through an experience and a journey, and things of that nature. Like the idea, the trap in SEO is thinking that if you do something this way, it'll be a shortcut to get you to your goal faster, when ironically that will inevitably slow you down at some point in the future, because it'll be a door that gets closed, and the end result will be like, you won't even be thinking about the stuff that you should be focused on. You'll just be thinking about your like loophole or whatever. And then an algorithm update comes out and websites start getting tanked 30%, 50%, 70%. And because people haven't been focused on those things, then they need to go through this whole internal approval process, get product, get dev, get everybody like aligned on that stuff. And it's all happening while people are coming to you and saying like, well, what happened to our traffic? Why did we just lose 50% of our traffic? Are you not doing a good job? Meanwhile, you've been trying everything that you know how to do. The one thing that's actually worth your focus is understanding these core concepts of what are the big tides that are changing. What does the future look like? And how can I understand that, create theses around it, and then bring it towards us? So that's sort of stuff that we do at SearchTides. All right, let's get into it. Search Generative Experience, SGMFE. What is it? It's basically a big colored block above a lot of other stuff, or sometimes below ads, or sometimes below organic, or sometimes above this other thing. Sometimes it's pink, sometimes it's purple, sometimes it's blue. Put something in the chat if you've ever seen a different color than that. I haven't, but I'd be curious if Google just knows what colors I like, so they just hit me with the colors that they think I like. And essentially, like all it really is what we were talking about before. The top 3 spots in the search results are going to get the majority of the traffic, and other spots in the search results are going to become less valuable over time. That's just how this stuff is going to play out. If we were to be honest with each other and ourselves for a second, we would say that there's a lot of good coming from SGE. So this is basically a search query for like, who's Arnold's wife? And the old response to this would have been probably Arnold Schwarzenegger's Wikipedia page. And then it would have been all this stuff about Arnold Schwarzenegger, because it was, the search result was basically being interpreted as, here's an entity, Arnold Schwarzenegger, plus another search query. This entity is super popular. I'm going to have entity specific stuff around that. Now you actually get that result from Maria Shriver, his former wife, and people freak out about this sort of thing. But the reality is, like, should you be really building a business, writing content about like this particular topic? Like, is it really valuable to provide that answer to someone? You could argue maybe yes, maybe no, especially since Wikipedia is already doing it. But this is the type of stuff, moving towards the future, thinking towards the future. This is the type of stuff I wouldn't be writing about, even if I was an entertainment magazine. One of the things that we have noticed is that a lot of SGE is getting pulled from snippets. So if you have right now, you're in the people also ask, and you're showing up in people also ask for different questions, or you're showing up in like rich snippet search results, you're going to see a lot of those things appearing in SGE, which is cool. If you're not in those things, that's where it's coming from. If you're not in those things, also don't worry about it. Don't freak out too much about it, because they change all the time. So here's an example from Wednesday with like a protein powder. And you can see over on the left-hand side, it's basically just like we put in, best whey protein powder. It's talking about protein content, sugar content, and fat as the 3 bullet points. Then on the right side, the very next day, it's talking about ingredients, nutrition, and protein, as well as taste and mixability. So how can you're like, oh, well, how do I get in there? You don't worry about getting in there from that perspective. And even if you look at it the day further, like, okay, what about the next day? Now it's talking about ingredients again, but now it's talking about protein content specifically. So it's not talking about nutrition anymore. And then the next day it's talking about like branched chains amino acids and stuff. And this is literally 3 days in a row. And so like, if for all of us who are working at companies getting asked about things like what's going on with this, the answer is it's super new. It's probably not even in beta mode. It's probably like an alpha product right now. And I have an exact plan on the things that we can do so we could get ahead of the trends that are happening. And then when you get asked, well, what are those things we can do? Then you can say that you stuck around to the end of this when we actually talked about actionable items, so you know all of them. So this is kind of a fun one. How to build a funhouse mirror for cheap. you know, everybody is looking for fun houses or like House of Horror type stuff, or the director of Saw 17 wants to come up with some new areas to have movies in. So if you actually look at the bottom of this one, you could see kind of follow-up questions down there. And one of the questions when we were doing this research was like how to cut out a mirror out of glass, or how to make a mirror from glass, or how to cut wood effectively. And those are two things that you would say, well, like, what does that have to do with me trying to build a fun house? But in reality, it's like, well, how do you build it for cheap? You use glass. How do you build it for cheap? You have to cut wood yourself. It's going to be DIY. That's how you're going to get it the cheapest. So what's happening with SGE is it's predicting down the road, like, here's what you'll also need to know if you want to accomplish this thing, as opposed to like, here's a bunch of search results that say that they're going to give you a guide on how to do this. So it's actively just telling you specifically right there. Same thing here with news, like what's going on in Israel. The SGE right now is going to give you dates. It's going to give you the latest events. It's going to give you updates, and it's going to give you news around it. What did it used to be? It literally used to be websites that would have pages that would say what's going on in Israel. So it's a huge difference there in terms of news, and it's going to be continually updated. And a lot of like, yeah, if you're in news, like this is going to be all over news, and it's going to be kind of like in your base. And I would argue that your best bet would be to get into the carousels. So yeah, news definitely is going to be disrupted by SGE for sure. I don't want to pretend that it's not the case. Okay, cool. So this is kind of like what we talked about before. Like, realistically speaking, if a lot of your stuff is getting cannibalized by SGE, there's a couple things you could do about it. But one of the things that I would ask myself in an honest capacity is like, how do I create more value through my expertise and through my experience compared to what I'm currently creating? If I'm reporting information and nothing else, isn't AI going to be good at that? Isn't AI going to be able to do those things just as well as me or better than me? And the honest answer is yes. And in a lot of instances, we're there already. So don't put your eggs in that basket. And we'll get into this in a little bit, similar as well. But same thing with a lot of top of funnel content. Like, information-based queries, there's going to be easier ways to get information than to go to the search results, comb through 4 articles, look for the thing that you're trying to find. Google's just figured out the latest way to do that, and they're doing it effectively. And so, you know, the adjustments that we need to make, and we'll talk about them in a few minutes, but they come from honest conversations with ourselves. Okay, cool. So what do we think is going to actually play out here? We think we're going to have more of House of Mirrors type stuff, where it's like, I'm getting content. We as a website will get traffic from articles and from content that we didn't expect to get traffic from. We sell mirrors, but we also put up a DIY how to cut glass, or how to carve wood, or whatever it is. And all of a sudden, our how to make a funhouse mirror traffic went down, but all of a sudden, the traffic on how to basically cut wood or how to carve a mirror from glass shot up out of nowhere. And so we're going to see a lot of those, what we would call like disjointed traffic, where it's not fully intuitive. But if you understood the journey of someone who is trying to accomplish that thing, you would understand, because you're an expert on it, that ultimately the best way to do something is, okay, to get this material myself, to cut it like this, to use glass for this thing, to use this particular type of saw. And if I'm doing it myself, I probably don't know what I'm doing. So this is a saw that I used when I was doing it, and it was terrible. So I don't think anybody should use it. And all the professionals seem to like it. Well, I guess I'm not a professional. So these are the types of content that are going to do well and perform well in the future and in this next environment. And that's essentially like this idea that we should be acting on a keyword basis, especially when we're talking about content, is going to become less and less relevant And it's going to become more and more about being the shepherd of all of the sub industries and subtopics inside of your business, inside of your company, that your ICPs will want to know about or will need to know about. Like, imagine if somebody came to your website and they could read all the articles, and you got a point for every helpful article that you read that was relevant to their customer journey, and you had a point subtracted for every article that they read that had nothing to do with what they wanted to know or was only tangentially related. How many points would you have? I can promise you most points is going to win. So that's the mentality that we've been telling our clients to start taking with the content that they generate. Okay. Actionable steps. Cool. So number one is deprioritize top of funnel content. Like what we were talking about before, this tends to be information based, and information aggregation is literally what an AI can do better than every single human out there. Why would you compete against that? So that's a really, really important topic. I know we mentioned it, but the reality is the winners moving forward in the AI era of search will be really good at cutting things and letting go of things and not trying to be the jack of all trades, but rather being the focused group on things where there's expertise and things where there's experience. And if that person isn't that, finding the people who are and bringing them in to create as well and to produce as well. Next thing, only create content, surprise, surprise, that you're an expert or you have experience in. And the reason why for that, and we gave the example before, like, can I add something to the internet that doesn't exist? Well, if I'm talking about my story, if I'm talking about my journey, then I actually can do that. If I'm talking about my 20 years of experience doing something and all the different things that we've seen in SEO and how this is a common mistake that people make, or it's a common fallacy that people have, even though they get told by an article online or from a Google algorithm update, from a Google announcement or something like that, like being able to add on top of that is what's going to create value. So the litmus test that we like to use is, can someone else write what you just did? If I can research what you just wrote and I can write 100% of it, were you really an expert? Did you really bring experience in? Probably not. So, and if you can't do those things, you either have to get somebody who can, or don't write about those things, realistically speaking. And the last thing is to make blogging fun again. And this is kind of like one of our big predictions for 2024, where, and shout out to Derek Wozniak for this, who is the chief SEO officer at SearchTides, and did, by the way, a tremendous amount of research and put together a course for all of these slides, and then let me just get up here and talk and make it seem like I'm the one coming up with all these great ideas. But making blogging fun again, Google has rewarded robotic, SEO optimized content for a very long time. That's not actually good content. The problem was there was a positive reinforcement loop that took place, which was like, Google's like, oh, write for people, write for humans. And you're like, okay, well, I keep writing for robots that crawl the website and I keep ranking #1. So like, which is it? And it was the latter. And now Google's finally coming out and saying, like, we know that that's what things used to be. And we want to get back to the way that like things were previously, the early phases of the internet, which was like people were writing on things because they were passionate about it, because they were knowledgeable about it, because they wanted to share their experiences with others, because they wanted to be able to connect on a human level with another human being. These are all things that are going to be so important and relevant during this entire AI era, yes, of search, but also of life. And the people who understand that are going to be able to resonate and connect with others in a much more meaningful and a much deeper capacity than those who still see things as transactional, as, okay, do X because of Y, because I think I'm going to get a result from it, not because I think it's the most helpful thing that I can do. That attitude, which we could call authenticity, is a big, big marker of success. Okay, next thing. Put your experience and expertise signals at the top of content, so not at the bottom of content. And I see that there's another question here. Where does technical SEO fall with this update? For example, if we conquer helpfulness, how much will page speed be a factor in Google's ranking of the page? Great question. So think of SEO as, or I like to think of SEO. In my experience, the way that we think about SEO is a balancing act between a few different things. So an SEO zero sum, which means yes, it's about what you do, but also it's about what everyone else around you does. So let's walk through an example. You have a great link profile and you have a strong website, you have good domain authority, you have good domain rating. Great. That is an advantage compared to everybody else who isn't doing that. Same thing with content and helpfulness. You're creating helpful content. Great. That is an advantage over someone who's not doing that. Same thing with technical SEO. Your website loads quickly. Great. That's an advantage over someone else who isn't doing that. Now, if you think about that conceptually, and you, let's say, like, don't have good technical SEO, but you have good content and you have a good link profile, you have a strong website, you will lose to someone who has all three, but you will beat someone who only has one of them. And so that's kind of the ebb and flow of SEO, where it's like the answer is always depends, because it always depends upon what others are doing, but you can still quantify what everyone is doing. And therefore you can still know the specific areas that you essentially have a deficit in, whether it's in helpfulness, whether it is in a link profile, or whether it's in stuff like technical stuff, or whether it is even in on-site optimization. So stuff like page speed and things like that will always be super important, because it's a core part of the experience of someone using the internet. But it's a good question. Okay, so what should you put at the top of the page when it loads super quick because you're cool page speed? You should talk about your expertise. You should talk about your experience. You should put those things in a very explicit capacity at the front of the page. It's time to be like, this is why it is valid for me to talk about these things. And ultimately, this is why it's worth your time to read, watch, listen to, whatever, me have these conversations, including, by the way, authorship profiles. Authorship bios at the bottom of the page, don't do it anymore. They have to be at the top of the page. Don't do it anymore at the bottom. Okay, next. You can actually optimize your authorship bios based on experience and expertise. So here's how you do it. Number one is, like, the big question here is, what qualifies you to contribute to a topic? Why should someone listen to you? Why should someone read your words? We talked about this before, which is like, I like long walks on the beach in my spare time, and I also talk about SEO with people all day, every day. Okay, cool. One of those things is related to me writing an article about SEO. The other one's related to me writing an article about the 10 best beaches in the United States to go take walks on. So expertise and experience are malleable things. They're not always tied in stone, but it's like, what qualifies you to contribute to that topic in particular? And like we talked about before, it's not your pastimes, it's not your relevant hobbies. Ultimately, going forward first with that. And if you follow us, shameless plug for our social medias, if you follow us on YouTube, if you follow us on LinkedIn, we have a video coming out where we talk about how you can actually use ChatGPT to revise your authorship bios for you. So you don't even need to write it. You just need to click a couple buttons. The next thing is just trust. Like, we have to make sure that we don't lose sight of these other important concepts along the way. We've talked about experience. We've talked about expertise. We've talked about authoritativeness. We've talked about authority. Trust is still in there. And you can really shoot yourself in the foot. Like, where's your address at, homie? How easy to find are your phone numbers? Do you have all the legal documentation that you need? Do you have pen names for for authors? Do they have a footprint outside of your website? Do you have editorial guidelines? Are they publicly posted? Do you have a way for people to interact with your content? Can people leave comments? Can people share their own experiences? Remember, your entire page is being scored. That stuff's super important. Websites like Reddit dramatically increased over the last algorithm updates, literally due to conversations where people share experiences. So these are all trust factors that, in the same vein, if you are not doing these things and someone else is, you will be at a disadvantage compared to them. All right, so let's get into some broad actions to take. Number one, I think we just went through all that stuff. Great. I decided to turn that one slide into 5 slides because then I could talk for 5 times as long. Okay. Understanding the levels of credibility. I think this is a really good applicable example to run through, because a lot of questions that come up are like, oh no, like, am I an expert? What do I do? Where do I get expertise from? How do I get credibility? So we're going to go through an example in the medical industry right now. So the top level is a medical professional, maybe in Medicare specifically, but a medical professional. And ideally someone who specializes in the topic of the article. There could not be a higher level of expertise than this example. The level below that would be somebody who's like a clinical researcher. And that's someone who's a published author. They have studies, they're on PubMed. You can look up their name and you can find those studies. That's a level below that. The level below that would be a relevant advocate. And this is where you can get outside of the professional component of it. So let's say I have a child and that child has ADHD, and I have what do I have? I have my experience of raising a child who has ADHD. I have a lot of observational value that I can talk about. I have a lot of experience that I can share with the world out there. That is a level of credibility, and that is a good level of credibility as well. And it is a very meaningful level of credibility. Is it enough? That depends on what everybody else is doing. And then the last sort of example level would be extra contribution. So I'm not an expert, but I interviewed a bunch of experts and I asked them what they thought, and I put their thoughts on the article, or I looked up on the internet. This would be a little bit lower. I looked up what experts thought about this and I kind of aggregated it all together, and now I'm sharing it. So if you think about it from that perspective, now we're getting into like the research. And so that's why the primary information and doing those interviews would be more helpful. But this is how we would think about credibility inside the medical industry specifically. I think that's it. Those are all the slides that we had to go through. And if you want to connect with us, as I mentioned before, we're on YouTube, youtube.com/SearchTides. We're on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/SearchTides. We are on, if you want to get in touch with us specifically around SEO, around either consulting or engagements or the classic SEO things that we do, searchtides.com, searchtides.com/contact. And yeah, that's what I had to go through today.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. Thanks everyone for listening. Once again, we'll follow up with a recording. We're planning on doing more of these.